Yeah. So let us just 1 minute. Just want to start at exactly 1:10. Yeah, I guess we can start now. So hello, everyone. My name is Jabba Ghalayini. I'm the Marketing and Communication Manager at AABS. I'm very happy to have you all here today. So today we have quite an interesting webinar, the Principles of Data Management for AABS Accreditation with QED. We have with us Joanne Powell, correct me if I'm wrong, Lead Advisor at Quality Education Development at QED, and Professor Hans van der Heijden, Founder and Director of H2 Software. And we have Sandrine Chichimbi from our team, the Accreditation Manager at AABS. So guys, the floor is yours. You can start the presentation.
Thanks very much, Dad. I'll just share my screen. And I'll just ask you to confirm that it all looks good at your end. Yep, excellent. Okay. So just very quickly, and thank you so much to be here. Thank you so much to Sandrine, to Jad, to Lana, and the team at AABS for having us. We're just delighted to be here. And very quickly, for those who may not know QED, we work with schools all over the world. And I guess, to be honest, we feel quite privileged because our relationship with schools and organizations like AABS gives us insights into how higher education and accreditation operates in different regions, and that brings a perspective to our work that we might not otherwise have. And of course, we value our strategic alliances very highly. And so I'm very, very glad to be sharing this session with my colleague, Professor Hans van der Heijden, who is not only the founder of H2 Software, but also the brains behind Accreditator. Hans, do you want to say a few words?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Joanne. Yes, so my name is Hans van der Heijden. I'm actually a part-time academic. I work at the University of Sussex, and I'm also a part-time software developer, and I have a small software development company where we develop software, including business school accreditation software, and we've called that the Accreditator. It's based on our accreditation experiences in Sussex from a couple of years ago, and since then we've developed it for other schools as well. So that's me.
Perfect, thank you. So what we thought would be important to do was to actually talk about the context of accreditation. And when you start an accreditation of any kind, like AABS, which is a very prestigious accreditation, there's a lot of principles and steps involved, because ultimately these accreditations aren't simple tick box exercises, but they're a real process of continuous improvement. So there's lots of things that schools have to consider, including support from the top, conducting gap analysis, project manage, communications with key stakeholders. But of course, within all of that, there is this need to really look at data management. And I mean, AABS, for example, has got 11 standards. They cover themes such as faculty, resources, students, research, impact. So data management is a really key aspect of making sure that you've got the evidence and the systems in place to actually tell your story in the most effective way possible. So it's a really, really key part of the process. And when we talk about data management, it's not always just about the accreditations. It covers a lot of things. So when we talk about effective data management, what we're really talking about is driving higher quality information. My apologies, excuse me. So good data management leads to more consistent and reliable data. And when you've got more consistent and reliable data, that can be used then to produce better information, which in turn then leads to all sorts of additional benefits in terms of analysis and decision making. Better quality data also provides a clarity of information and a clarity of data, which provides greater understanding and transparency in your information. And that helps then when you're doing things accreditation such as AABS, it helps to avoid kind of empty generalist statements, but instead you're grounding your story and you're grounding your narrative in facts that can be substantiated. And that's really, really important if you want to stand out as a quality school that provides quality information and quality systems and processes. Higher quality information, of course, leads to more accurate reporting. And that in turn makes it easier to track progress over time. And that's not just about looking at things historically, which is where we all tend to start. We kind of collate the historical information, but it's then about interpreting that data, interpreting those the trends, and looking forward into seeing how that can actually help you build, you know, greater stakeholder information, to anticipate movements and to plan better for the future. And of course, this evidence-based decision-making relies on quality information and the analysis of trends. And some of the other things that come in here that are really important, you want a system, whatever you put in place, that can allow you to adapt quickly. So you can, if you've got changes in your data, changes in the inputs that are coming into you, that you can, you know, quickly integrate those into whatever your data management system is and review the revised information that it produces. You of course, I mean, I always find when I start doing things, you really start to play with data, but it becomes almost an exercise in what can I produce, what can I report on? And sometimes what we forget to do in the early stages is remember that actually the biggest part of data management is really about the analysis and evaluation of data rather than the collection and the management of data. But of course, that analysis and evaluation relies on the systems that are in place for collection and management. And finally, in terms of looking ahead and looking to the future, ideally your data would let you play around with forecasting and with what-if scenarios and kind of areas like that. Hans, I'm going to throw over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Joanne. Yeah, so I would like to talk about the sort of types of different data management systems that you can have in your school. And we have identified 3 of those. Now, each of those is actually not, it's not a level of progression in any way. I mean, each of them is absolutely fine. It's just for different situations, you might just have different data management solutions. I'm just going to start with the first one, which, for want of a better word, we can just call the Excel option. The idea is that we use Excel to start working on our tables and on our charts. So that has a number of advantages. One, of course, that one advantage is that the schools already have Excel mostly, and so you don't really have to pay anything extra for the data management options that you want to include, because most schools already have Excel, and you can just get started straight away. And so that's fine. And I'm sure that you know, and I certainly know of many schools who have Excel as their prime solution for data management options. There are some downsides, though, to that particular solution. If you have everything in Excel, the first one is, of course, is that you have to sort of build all the intelligence around the data into the spreadsheets themselves all anew. So, for example, if you want to calculate certain things, such as staff-student ratios and things like that, you do have to implement all of that in Excel. There's not sort of specialized software that does that for you. So that's one. And in doing so, you might get it wrong because there might be a couple of different algorithms or different policies for deciding what exactly staff-student ratio is, for example. So which staff do you include? Which students do you include? And some accreditations have very specific rules for that. And you just have to make sure you don't make any mistakes when you decide on the number of students and the number of staff and so on. But it's possible, and you can do that. Second disadvantage is with spreadsheets is that these spreadsheets can grow complicated and complex very, very quickly. And so before you know it, you have essentially a very, very complicated Excel spreadsheet system on your in your school, which is fine. But if then that person leaves, then it is going to be very, very difficult again to pick it up again and to look again at somebody else's spreadsheet and think, yeah, how did that work again? So I can't really understand why this person did this and this, and why does it have this and this specific formula, and so on and so forth. So that might be a really tricky bit. And I know of several schools who've found themselves in real trouble when their key member of staff left, and they were basically left with spreadsheets that nobody really understood. And so they had to start all over again. Other disadvantages really are about the disadvantages of spreadsheets themselves, really, because it's not actually a database. It's very possible that you store data twice, 3 times, sometimes 4 times. And then when you have to change that data, you sometimes change it in one area of the spreadsheet, but then of course you also have to, you forget to change it at the other side of the spreadsheet. And then you get many inconsistencies, and which can just drive you mad when you get the report and you think, why is this data not the same as the other one? Okay, moving on to the second data management system, which is a off-the-shelf product. So you can buy something such as Accreditation. It would be remiss of me not to mention it. That's a type of software that you can buy. It's not spreadsheet based, it's actually database orientated. So when you have a database, the data is only stored once, and all the tables come out of the database out of a single source of truth, so to say. So there's never really any inconsistencies across the different tables. That is extremely useful, especially, for example, if you have many complex data to deal with. The other thing, of course, is that some of those intelligence that I mentioned before, like, for example, staff-student ratios, what to include, all of that intelligence you don't have to figure out yourself. It's all done in the system. And it's, of course, also, you gain a lot of time in producing this data. And when you gain a lot of time in producing this data, it allows you more time to actually evaluate the data and provide a good narrative. This is often the key bottleneck in accreditation systems. People spend so much time producing the data and producing the report that there's no time left to analyze the report and see, oh, what did this actually tell us? So that's one advantage of an off-the-shelf product. I'll move on to the third one, and that's actually basically, that's like a system that you build yourself in the school. So you build your own system. Maybe you have an IT department that can do that for you. And we've seen that as well, although never really a lot. So it is quite rare. But what accreditation officers then do is they say, can you actually build our own system that is extremely dedicated to ourselves? And then what you get is something that is really highly customized. So there's quite a lot that is available just for example, the country. That's really quite country specific. I know of some countries, for example, that have national databases where they store publications. And so that particular software that you would build your own would then actually integrate with that specific national software with publications in it. That, of course, is a lot more expensive than anything that came before. And it will also involve a lot of application programming interfaces. And so it might get very, very complicated very, very quickly. So those are the sort of the 3 systems that we tend to see.
So what we always think is that it's really important when you're thinking about data management is just to really think about the basics. And we're going to show you a framework in a couple of moments that we think helps with this. But really what we're talking about doing is it's really important to, first of all, map the data requirements. So what are your data requirements, that you need? Is it related to accreditation or not? Where are the sources of those places? Because quite often the challenge is that we have data within our institutions in multiple places. So whatever system we put in place, whether it's a basic Excel type system right up to a internal, very evolved, complex system or something in between like Accreditation, that you bring all of those data from multiple places together. and have a consistent single source for producing the kinds of reports and insights and analysis and trends that you want to see that are useful for your school from an informational perspective. And then, of course, it's the accuracy and the consistency of all of these. Hans, do you want me to go to the next slides? Or
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Should be there for you now.
Okay, so this is just an example of a table that AABS requires, and what you can see immediately is that it does require aggregated data on, for example, the number of doctoral degrees, the number of females, number of males, number of nationals, number of non-nationals, and so on. So all of that data is aggregated, and for that you would need individual faculty data, so collect individual data either through Accreditation, off-the-shelf system, or a spreadsheet. You have to do that for both full-time faculty and part-time faculty. So once again, it is not impossible to do all of this manually with a spreadsheet. The trouble is, of course, as soon as things start to change, and every school that I know changes pretty much every day. So there's always a new member of staff, or there's new sort of experience that you want to record. So as soon as you start to have any changes in your school, then you need to produce or create the report again. So with off-the-shelf software, that's really easy to do. Just make the change and run the report again. And with spreadsheets, it might be a little bit more complicated.
That's a similar example, yeah. But again, the same faculty information there needs to be used to analyze it against the research data. So again, it's not even just about looking at data through one lens, but you're looking at the same data through multiple lenses, and that can be challenging at times. So back to the meat. So what we've done is, it doesn't really matter whether you're talking about using something that's based in Excel or using something that's more complicated or taking an off-the-shelf system like Accreditation. What we recommend is that there's kind of a 6-step process to kind of looking at how that system works and how you put it together. So step 1 is all about conducting a comprehensive assessment of the Institute's data management requirements. So what we're talking about here is that there's a real need to kind of consider what are the specific accreditation standards and criteria. So if you're looking at AABS accreditation, the first port of call is, what do I need to fulfill the requirements of AABS? What kind of faculty data? What kind of research data? Am I going to track my impact analysis through a data system, or am I going to do that separately? But it's looking at all this, what kind of student or enrollment data? So you're looking at all of those data elements and that you need to bring together. You're also going to be looking at things like, well, do we have other accreditations in the school? Either other national kind of local accreditation requirements, or other international accreditations like ACSB or EFMD or AMBA, for example. And then can we use the same data to produce reports for those requirements? Because you don't want to be building multiple systems side by side. You want one system with one source of data that will pull all of those reports for you. And then, are there internal reporting needs that need to be considered? If you've got all of that data in one place, how are you going to leverage that internally? So it's thinking about what are all of your requirements and where does that data currently exist? That's kind of the first step. Hans, I'll keep going, but if you want to jump in, just do.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes schools have a research repository, for example, so they already have a database of their publications, and that would then, for example, feed into their the website profiles of the faculty. More often than not, a lot of the accreditation data is already available either in a database or perhaps in spreadsheets, and the same with HR data and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So point number 2 would be defining roles and responsibilities. So this is really about identifying who are the key stakeholders and also looking at what are the roles and responsibilities within your data team. So one of the things that I think is always important is that the system doesn't manage and maintain the data. People manage and maintain the data, and the system is a tool to do that. So it's really, really important to identify who is responsible for managing data, who is responsible for maintaining data, and ensuring that there's accountability And then in terms of, as Hans said, a lot of that information is often available elsewhere through the research repository if your institution has one, or maybe it's a spreadsheet that the person in charge of research maintains. You've got your HR department. So who are the key stakeholders that you need to liaise with in terms of that? And where is the responsibility for data sit with them? The next part after that is developing your policies and procedures. So this is always the boring bit, and it's the bit that quite often, if we're starting out, it's the bit that tends to be forgotten about in schools. But depending on where you're based and the jurisdiction, some jurisdictions have very evolved data management policies, expectations around data security, data privacy. Other regions are not quite as focused on those areas. But if you're at school looking at an accreditation like AABS, there's probably an expectation that you follow best practice. And best practice would, at a minimum, say you need to be thinking about things like data privacy, data confidentiality, data security. All of those things are very, very important. So that means you need to look at things like your data governance practices, your data quality standards. What are your data security? So, for example, are people holding the detailed faculty information on individual PCs in an Excel sheet, which means that that data is very open from a security perspective and a privacy perspective? Or what are your institutional policies and procedures around those areas, and what's the expectation? Who's got access to particular data at particular times, and is that controlled? I mean, data is a very valuable asset. You've only got to look at the level of, phishing and sophisticated, programs that are out there that are designed to try and get in and corrupt your systems. And there's been lots of high profile cases of third level institutions which have been targeted for their data, the value of their data. So it's something that no school, no matter what size, can afford to ignore. It's the policies and procedures around data security and data management. We're looking at the establishment then of your collection and storage infrastructure. So what's the easiest way to collect the data? So as Hans said, you might find that your research data is already sitting in a repository. So you're looking to export that at the appropriate time and import it into a single point of contact for driving accreditation reports and for intersecting that information with other data, such as faculty demographics. In terms of research, what proportion of research is being produced by full-time rather than part-time faculty? Sometimes schools are very keen to look at the nationality kind of bias in terms of different things, or the gender bias. So you're looking at all of these different areas and you're slicing and dicing that data. So you really need to look at, where do we establish that data? What systems are we putting in place to capture it? And if you're using an off-the-shelf system like Accreditator, it's also looking at what are the import tools available and what's the easiest way to get that data from one system into another so we can use it. We can combine all of the different data sources together. And then the final step really is, step 5, not even the final step. I'm jumping one step ahead of myself. Implementing your data quality and assurance. So who's responsible for the data at various points? For example, I've worked in many schools that use a research repository. In some schools, that research repository is managed by a small team of people responsible for the data. In other schools, faculty are responsible for submitting the information for that. And sometimes faculty, with the best will in the world, perhaps don't enter that information as accurately as we'd like, or as frequently as we'd like. So there has to be somebody who's responsible for it. Is it that faculty are responsible, or is it that there are people within the data team or the research team that are responsible for the accuracy of that data? Who's going to check that that's happened? So you're looking at data validation checks, you're looking at data entry guidelines, possibly looking at periodic audits and reviews. And Hans, I know within some of the software that's off the shelf, there's built-in kind of checks and balances as well for software, for data.
Yeah, for example, our own software has got a lot of so-called issue checkers. So if things are not right, or if the publications are not quite right, or there's something missing, then the software will highlight that and say, hey, wait a minute, We've got 1,000 publications in the system, but 100 of these are not quite right in terms of missing data. And so it will highlight these sort of things. So that can be really useful for data quality.
Yeah. And similarly, if you're a school that's using an Excel version of this, whoever's doing that needs to build in that kind of Excel checks and balances, whether it's within hopefully macros and formula within Excel, or whether it's full-on manual checking. But that quality assurance piece around the data exists no matter what your system is. It's just a matter of how much you systemize. And Jad, I know you're looking at time, but I am on target, I promise. We will finish in good time. And then the final step is around data training and support. So whoever the stakeholders are in terms of this, it's important to provide support and guidance so that people understand your data processes, your data management. And to be honest, that's all part of the bigger picture of creating or fostering a culture of data awareness and responsibility. It's all about that wider, continued framework of continuous improvement. Once your system is in place, then you're looking at, making sure you manage it. So it's easy to do a job once, it's harder to maintain that systematically and consistently over time. So from an AABS accreditation perspective, for example, you want to make sure you keep that information updated so you can track your progress against the standards and that you're ready for reporting and that you can use it for planning purposes. So monitoring and evaluating the effectiveness of your processes. You need to have mechanisms to gather feedback from stakeholders and make improvements. And you want to just make sure the quality and integrity of the data is there for you. The second thing you want to do is maintain your data security and privacy. We've emphasized that, but of course, these standards keep changing. So you need somebody that's either a system that stays on top of this, or people in your institution that are staying on top of this, or both. And finally, of course, it's all about that kind of idea of continuous improvement. So it's promoting that culture, encouraging feedback and innovation, all of which in turn add to the quality and the caliber of your systems and processes as an institution from an AABS perspective. And that's pretty much it. I'll hand back over to Jad and to Sandrine. We're happy, of course, to take any questions that you might have in the process.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Thank you so much, Professor Hans. This was a very informative webinar, and I think a lot of people are going to utilize all this information. So, of course, Q&As are open, but if anyone has any questions, they need to know any more information regarding either the QED or accreditor or the AABS accreditation, we're all available. Joanne, Professor Hans, and Sandrine are available for all your questions. And of course, this webinar will be shared with all of our registered attendees, and they will be able to go back through the video and be able to ask all the questions they have. And we will be sharing their emails as well, so that you can send whatever you need. So I think if anyone needs to add anything, if anyone wants to ask any question, you're more than welcome.
I have a question. Can I jump in and ask one to start with?
Yeah, of course.
So it's probably more for Sandrine, I suspect, than for you, Jad. But I'm just wondering, when it comes to, because I know the AABS have, you've got quite a detailed, as you'd expect, kind of data sheet as part of your initial application and stuff. What do you see are the biggest challenges for schools in terms of data? Which areas do schools find hardest or most frustrating to pull together based on your conversations with schools?
Hi, yes, thank you, Joanne. Thank you very much. When it comes to data management, we usually there's a data sheet for faculty, student research, and programs. But I think the most challenging issues usually comes with faculty. Many schools challenge with faculty because we need the full-time faculty, even if the faculty are not, even if they are on sabbatical, but they're being paid, you need to count them in. Or some schools find themselves in a situation where many faculties are coming from, outside, they're being outsourced, or they're not full-time faculty, the part-time faculty. And sometimes when it comes to the ratios, faculty to student ratio, that's usually a big deal, It's a bit difficult for them to find a balance in that ratio and, get to convince the reviewers that, this is a good balance, that there's enough faculty, there's enough faculty, in-house faculty to fit or to meet the number of students. So that's usually a big issue that we have. It's a faculty-student ratio.
The faculty-student ratio is a really interesting one because I know from the schools that we've worked with that ratio can be calculated in so many different ways.
Exactly.
So, and sometimes, accrediting bodies have a way that they suggest, and sometimes it's just a general request to provide it. And faculty are thinking, or schools are thinking, do we use just our full-time faculty? Do we use part-time faculty? Do we use this? Do we use that? How do we deal with part-time students? And I always find that, for me, there's two things that are really key for the faculty-student ratio, and I'd be really keen to hear what Professor Hans thinks. One would be that if you're not given guidance to do it a particular way, that the school is clear on A, the way it does it, and that it does it the same way every time, and B, that the school is ready to talk to that ratio, because quite often it's not about the flat number that the ratio gives you, it's about what that means in terms of it, because different ratios can mean different things depending on how they're calculated. And I think it's really important that schools can talk to the ratio effectively, because because behind that is the principle of, are the students getting a quality education experience, and are there enough faculty there to deliver that? So I think being able to talk to the principle behind the ratio is always really important.
Of course, the fact that Africa is big, we have 5 different regions, and schools are in different parts of the continent.
Exactly.
Differently. So each school is taken it into consideration as a different school. We look at the local context, how things. So you can't just have a general rule.
And even the way they calculate it can be different.
The local context. So we also look at that. So as you say, the school just has to make it clear as into how they've calculated the ratio, to explain, to make it understandable. So that's very important.
What's your experience, Hans, on this?
Yeah, I would just like to add that I think AABS does it quite well, especially in their instructions. They say this is how you need to calculate that. And in that way, everybody understands what it is. And I think AABS has this emphasis on FTE rather than headcount, which is also very good, because that allows it to, just look at the actual number of staff that is responsible for the student experience. So what they also do, and that's also very good, is that they want staff-student ratios per program, which highlights the point that I think that Sandrine and also you, Joanne, mentioned, that it can be really quite different by program, what the optimal student experience, optimal staff-student ratios should be. I mean, generally, the higher up you go in the degrees, like postgraduate, doctoral, and so on, you want the staff-student ratios to be a lot smaller than, for example, than perhaps undergraduate, although I totally recognize that is not an absolute principle, but it is very important to see which type of program has which side of staff-student ratio. And yeah, so I think for AABS purposes, that's very well put together. There might be a conflict though, because of course the school might have a totally different way of calculating staff-student ratios, and so sometimes you can get that mismatch between what the accreditation body wants and what the school actually does, and so that might create a sort of conflicting narrative too, which you have to be very careful about as well.
So I had a question based on your presentation today. I know you've suggested 3 options for data management, but when we come into the African context, we found ourselves in a situation where not all the schools have like big budget to have systems, like Accreditation and all other systems. So for those schools who do not have that budget, because data management is not just about accreditation, it's also about your decision making, just being able to organize your own process, in your school. If they have to use, I know using Excel is time consuming. If they have to use Excel, do you have like suggestions on how to make it a bit user-friendly, or to make things less complicated or less time consuming?
Yeah, can I take this, Joanne? Because
Yeah, please do.
I have
You
some
are far more
opinions
experienced than I.
Yeah, I have some opinions about that. Yeah, so the key thing with Excel is, of course, that it is not a database. So if you make changes, for example, if when you want to change faculty or something, the faculty can appear in like 4 or 5 different worksheets. So the key thing when you are going for an Excel option is to actually try to make it a bit like a database. So you have to sort of create different worksheets for faculty, different worksheets for publications, and then different worksheets that build upon those individual worksheets. I hope that makes sense, but that basically, so you have to use fairly advanced stuff like formulas like VLOOKUP, for example, and HLOOKUP, pivot tables and things like that. So it can be done, and Excel certainly has a number of advanced features where you can sort of transform Excel to the best that it can as a database application. That would be my number one recommendation if you want to go for the Excel option, just to make it a bit more like a database, so you can get all the advantages of having a database rather than just dealing with like 1,000 different spreadsheets, and you think, well, what is that all about?
I would add to that, because I think Hans is quite correct, that it's so important to keep the raw data separate from your formulas and your analysis.
Yeah.
Don't put those on the same sheets, which you do see sometimes. That's just a recipe for disaster. And it's important to build in checks and balances.
Yeah, also documentation is very important, Sandrine. So you have to realize that even you yourself, when you look back at your own spreadsheets that you made 3 months ago, you're like, what was that all about? What was I doing there? And so it's important even for yourself that you document to say, oh, this table is doing this, this cell in Excel is doing that, and this is how that all links together. Because for sure you will have some quite sort of complicated spreadsheets, and so documentation is absolutely key as well. And
finally, where it gets stored, not on an individual's laptop because they happen to be the person that's developed it and owned it. It needs to be, you need to treat it as seriously as it would be any other key data system.
That's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, so especially, I would definitely recommend that it's being put in the cloud with proper security arrangements around it. So, only certain people can access it and stuff like that. It's not publicly available on the internet, that sort of thing. Very important, yeah.
Thank you. Jerry, if you have anything else to say?
No, I was just about to say, so I think this is a good full perspective on everything, and I'll be sharing the recording and your emails so that people can actually ask all the questions they have. And for whoever wasn't able to attend, will be able to go through it and send you all their concerns or inquiries. So I thank you, Joanne, and I thank you, Professor Hans, and definitely thank you, Sandrine, for your participation today. Thank you for creating an amazing presentation and for the webinar. And we hope to do this very soon again.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.